Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. I generally try to avoid doing two back-to-back videos on a similar topic on this channel. There are a lot of different issues out there that I want to talk about, and focusing too much on one can get kind of dull. I like a lot of variety in my life, so I try and keep things changed up. Of course, there are things that I come back to time and again. The 20th century year is a good example of that. But focusing too much on one subject is not usually what I like to do. All of this is sort of a roundabout way of saying, if you're new around here, and you don't want to hear back-to-back-to-back videos on the state of marketing comics and other independent media projects, well, trust me, this isn't going to be a regular occurrence, but I do think it is very important to investigate the best ways to build a story circle in the ever-shifting landscape of the attention economy. So naturally, when I was watching the All stream on Shadiversity's channel, on the Night Watch channel yesterday, I took a lot of interest in one of the subjects that came up. Now, if you want to know why the idea of having a central clearinghouse for independent comic campaigns is really important right now, they give the full story in that stream, which I'm going to link in the description down below. I don't really intend to rehash it here. The problem with any kind of listing of media is that the person putting the list together has a great deal of outsized influence over that list. The purpose of this hub, as stated by Shad, would be to create a place people can go and find a large number of comic campaigns or available comics listed all together, rather than having them all segregated out on a bunch of individual websites that are very hard to get to if you don't already know they exist. The problems with such a listing are manifold, and you can hear many of them articulated by the various guests on that stream if you watch it in full. The problem that I want to point out with the idea as it was pitched on this stream is that just about everyone on that stream was agreed to the idea that there should be as few restrictions to what can be listed as possible. The reason for this, as stated, was to avoid any kind of censorship or favoritism in the way that projects were listed. I understand why this was a goal that everyone on the stream had in mind. My goal in this particular video is to explain why I feel they were putting the cart before the horse. In order to do that, let me first articulate Nate's first rule of politics. Any sufficiently concentrated power is indistinguishable from government. Now that may sound like a very strange thing to say. It's mainly because I'm riffing on Arthur C. Clarke, and you can look that up if you wish. The point of the law is to articulate the reality that everyone governs. The point is, you, yourself, have a great deal of power over your own life, and thus you are the one who governs it. It is the scaling up of this principle that creates societies and political structures. And when I say a political structure, I am referring to any interaction of power between people through some kind of a medium, whether it be business, society, or what we traditionally think of as government, which is to say hierarchies of moral and legal authority. Thus, it is true that if the goal is to assemble a listing of creative works, the person assembling that listing will inherently govern who does and does not go on the list and what qualifies people to be on that list or not. It is a natural and knee-jerk reaction to say when you are building a list, the most important thing to decide is who goes on that list. And if the person in charge of that list takes no steps to monitor it, then most likely, yes, the persons on the list will be the way the list is broken down. However, if another principle is chosen as a part of how the list is built, then the people who govern that list will be able to refer to that principle rather than their natural human instincts to help them build the list. This is why I believe rather than worrying about censorship or favoritism in the way listings on the Comic Hub are decided upon, it is better to establish a very clear and objective set of criteria that must be met in order to go on the list, and then make it impossible to deny people who meet those criteria. For example, you might require that people listed on your Comics Hub have no backing by a major publishing house. And you should probably develop a list of 4 or 5 specific companies that constitute major publishing houses. Obviously, Marvel and DC, Image, maybe IDW, and Boom. Or you could just list the big 2 and leave it at that. Alternatively, you might require that all comics listed on your Comics Hub just be creator-owned properties, regardless of where they are being published. Now, it might seem kind of lame to have requirements for stuff to be listed on your Hub website right out of the gate. But the reality is, if you do not set out a set of principles very clearly from the beginning, it is remarkably simple to get bullied into accepting someone else's principles later on. The clear reality is, people who articulate the set of principles they will stand by tend to fall back on those principles when people try and bully them into new principles. On the other hand, people who articulate no principles but just want to be inclusive tend to get bullied into including the people with a very narrow set of principles and excluding everyone else. It's very admirable for Shad to say that he wants to create a system where anyone can list their work to be discovered. But the reality is, no one system will boost the discoverability of everyone's work. It is better to begin with a very clearly articulated set of principles that will govern what you want to promote, and then rigorously enforce those and no others for as long as you lead this particular project. The second concern that was brought up by a couple of the guests on the All Stream was the need for people to be able to age gate their material. A couple of guests clearly articulated that they wanted to be able to have a place where their kids could go and look for the kinds of stories that they enjoyed as kids. And they wanted to be able to trust that their kids could go to this place and enjoy the stories there without being exposed to anything not quite suited to them. Now, I'm going to set aside the idea of kids' entertainment for now. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but this is not the place to get into them. Instead, I want to suggest that it would be better to have a 2-tier system to any place created. Have an all ages section and a teens and up section, and then restrict access to the second section to people with a registered account. Most kids I know younger than 12 do not have an email address, and thus they cannot sign up for an account at the site without their parents' permission. Maybe I'm out of touch, but I know that at least the kids in my extended family don't have email accounts yet, and none of them are older than 12. If that pattern holds, it should be a pretty good way to differentiate between all ages material and stuff that is suited to a more mature audience. If there is a strong desire to create listings for nudie mags or extremely violent material, it may be necessary to have an affiliated adults-only website, but that is getting into the pretty nitty-gritty parts of it, and frankly, that's something that I think would have to be tackled on a case-by-case basis anyway. So if I was building a hub, would not make it a default part of the offered service. Besides, smut artists already have Patreon. So these are the 2 things that I would recommend for anyone looking to put together a listing of all the independent projects out there, whether they be novels, comics, movies, music, or all of them together. Have a clearly articulated set of criteria that submissions must meet to be listed on the site, and then make it clear that anyone who meets the criteria can be listed on your site. Then, make sure that it is very simple for people who want to differentiate between all access content and more mature content to do just that, particularly if they want to turn their kids loose on the website to peruse it at their leisure. Now, all of this is going to require a little more work than a self-updating list that is run mostly by AI. But I think having that extra layer of work, that little bit of manual review to ensure that clear and concise standards are met and upheld, will build user trust and make it a great deal more difficult for a listing to be influenced by outside sources. Of course, these things are just a starting point, and there are a number of other issues that really need to be thought about, one of which that I thought was very interesting and was brought up during the discussion by Mike Miller was the possibility that people could pay for advertising space on the listing. thus promoting their own campaign by kicking in a little bit of money to help maintain the website. That's not a bad idea, but it clearly has a lot of potential for abuse that would require people to think very carefully before implementing such a system. Unfortunately, I'm not business savvy enough to offer any clear ideas on how that might work. I just know that it's going to be a very difficult thing to make work in a way that seems fair to the user base. Now, I'm aware that IndieCron, which is a collection for independently published comic books, already exists. It's a very serviceable website and makes titles on it very discoverable. And I wouldn't object if this simply became the default site that people used for comic books, but I think we need something similar for other mediums. Also, I think that IndieCron's laser focus on crowdfunding needs to be expanded. Currently, there are a number of publishers, most notably the Rippaverse and Iconic Comics, who put out comics directly rather than through crowdfunding, and I believe they need to have a seat at the table. Although, it is a valid choice to govern your list by whether they are doing crowdfunding, I think if the goal is to get as many independent creators listed as possible, that is not the best governing principle for your list. Anyway, those are just my thoughts at the moment. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and if you would like to hear more thoughts on ways I think a list such as this could be curated. While you're down there, there's a like button and a subscribe button. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.